Hi there, Higher Politics. Just a quick welcome to the new course. Looking forward to working with you. This week we're going to be looking at section 1, which is political theory. In this section, we consider a range of theorists, people who do a lot of thinking about political issues, who do a lot of thinking about the key matters which relate to our lives. And we're going to start off with section 1, which is ideologies. Now, a political ideology is someone's belief system. It is their worldview. So there are a range of different ideologies that we look at. We look at things like nationalism. We, as a group, won't be looking at nationalism, but nationalism is a key ideology. It believes in a devotion to the nation and prioritising the welfare of your nation. Liberalism talks about things like liberty, freedom, and a whole range of other matters relating to it. The two that we're going to focus on are socialism and conservatism, and for the most part, these two ideologies have dominated the 20th century and continue to have relevance within the 21st century. One thing I want to state, first of all, is that ideologies are not something that is an exact science. We can look at the beliefs of conservatives and socialists and put them on a scale. For example, a communist is a type of socialist, but a communist would not be considered a democratic socialist in the same way that the mainstream of, say, the Labour Party would be seen. So socialism is a broad spectrum, as is conservatism. Some conservatives are one nation conservatives that believe in the state having a greater role in people's lives, whereas other conservatives believe that actually the state should be very, very limited in people's lives. So these matters will be discussed. The first ideology we're going to look at is conservatism. Now, if we think about the word conservative for just a moment, we would often associate it with lacking change. If I dress conservatively, it would mean that I don't go out in a pink tutu. It means I don't go out in a clown outfit. That would be a radical dress sense that I would have. Conservative, if I was to dress conservatively, I would wear a suit as I normally would within the class. It means that I wouldn't be changing the way in which I did things much. So conservatives look to conserve. They look to keep things as they are for the most part. Although some theorists, such as Edmund Burke, would disagree with that. They believe that conservatism is about changing where necessary, that you shouldn't look to uproot things unnecessarily. Socialists believe more in change, but we'll talk about that in time. So, when we're talking about conservatism, we can look at a number of aspects. The first aspect that I'm going to look at is the role of society and what conservatives believe society should entail. So, the first thing is to state is that conservatives tend to believe in something called organic society. The word organic is linked to the word organism. And if we think about society, what makes up the world in which we live, the way in which we surround ourselves with community and a whole range of different things? Conservatives believe that society is not something that you can manufacture. It's not something that you can design and then roll out. Society is something that grows on its own. Our relationships with other people are bound together due to institutions such as the church, such as the role of the family, such as the role of marriage. A whole range of different things organically grow. Conservatives would compare it to a living organism. So, for example, if you think about the human body, if you were to disassemble a human body and then try to reassemble it, it would not work again because it's a natural phenomenon. If I was to take, for example, a car and I was to remove the battery, or if I was to remove the alternator, if I was to remove other key components of the car and then restructure it, it would work as well, perhaps even better than it would do before. Conservatives believe that this is not possible to achieve, that society actually depends on organic traditions. So if you think about the United Kingdom for a moment, the United Kingdom has obviously developed certain traditions such as the monarchy over time, that the monarchy is essential to British society, and that if you try to redraw the map and redraw the boundaries of society from scratch, it wouldn't work as effectively because we have naturally grown with the monarchy in this country. Other countries do it slightly differently, but that's the way their societies have organically changed. Edmund Burke, for example, a key conservative theorist, and make sure that you're referring to theorists as you go along here. Edmund Burke wrote a book called Reflections on the French Revolution, where he argued that the French Revolution, which abolished the Catholic Church, which changed the metric system, which changed the way in which politics was done entirely in a very short space of time, was a mistake. He believed that actually that whilst change was necessary in France at the outset of 1789, whilst change was necessary, it was not possible to simply redraw it. In France, for example, those of you who done history will know this, that they changed the calendar and started from the year zero. Edmund Burke said, you can't do this because people are aware of the structures round about them and what make up society. And you can't just simply redraw it. That's why when, during the French Revolution, people still yearned for the saints' days, they still yearned for Christian festivals and holidays, believing that the new secular ones didn't really match up because they had grown with Catholicism despite some of the mistakes of the church during that time. So conservatives fundamentally believe that things such as the role of marriage, changing the definition of marriage should not be done hastily. Not ruling it out completely, but it should not be done hastily because that is what we understand. That we shouldn't look to accelerate the decline of the church. If it declines, it declines, but that tradition is important within our society. If you think about the role of the family, having traditionally two parents is seen as often being better for the family than other structures. Whilst that's not always possible, conservatives believe that if you try to retain that structure of the family, it tends to help with cohesion. Others would disagree. So conservatives do tend to look to resist change. And Edmund Burke is one of the big examples, and it's crucial to note what he says. He says that it's not that conservatives are against change, they're against unnecessary change. Simply redrawing things as socialists may do is not desirable and shouldn't really be promoted unnecessarily. So that's society. And if you look at conservative policymakers over the years, whilst they are open to change because of the rapid changing nature of the world today, many conservatives will stand out and say that no, we are moving far too far. If you look at the debate on gender, for example, conservatives are more likely to take a traditionalist approach to the gender debate, whilst advocating change where necessary. That moves us on to property. Now, property is an important element of conservative thinking. The notion that people have the right to own private property is integral. Now, if you were a socialist, you would tend to believe that owning private property creates a major division within society, and it's quite easy to see why that might be the case. However, conservatives argue that it's actually the opposite, that if you want to free an individual, you must give them the opportunity to own the property and realise their ambitions. For example, if we think about a burglary is often seen as a more traumatic experience for the victim than many other crimes because it's an attack on property. It's an attack on their home that they have designed, that they've put together in the mould which they want it to be. Very often property is seen as a reflection of ourselves. If I own a sports car, it's reflective of my personality to a degree. If I own a gaming console, or if I own a particular type of house with a garden, that's my choice and it will reflect the person who I want to be. So property is seen as an integral part of what I suppose conservatives believe is crucial to people. So if you think about conservatives like Margaret Thatcher, Margaret Thatcher often spoke about the importance of Britain becoming a property-owning democracy. If you own property, it made you ambitious, it created a more competitive environment, and people's individualism could show through. It freed people from the constraints of the state. If you think about house shopping or shopping for property more generally, people will shop around because they've got their own tastes, they've got their own preferences, and therefore a Conservative believes that it's important to protect that. And if you want to accomplish freedom on that level, you must protect people's right to private property and to gain and accumulate property. David Cameron once said one of the most natural things in a person's soul is to leave property or leave wealth to their children. And that's a very natural pull, rather than have the state collect it and then redistribute, which is a more socialist perspective. So property, absolutely vital. And I'll return to elements of that very shortly, folks. One point I should make here, and I should really underline, is that when I talk about conservatism, I might refer to the Conservative Party or Conservative parties across Europe and in Western democracies regularly, but I would often refer to small c conservatives. If you're a small c conservative, it means you have a conservative viewpoint. So, for example, if I dress conservatively, I would use a small c. But conservative thinking, that would also be a small c. You don't necessarily have to be a member of the Conservative Party to be conservative in your opinions on certain things. One of the other things is the role of the state. Now, this links us to one particular thinker who is Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes wrote many centuries ago, and he wrote the book Leviathan, which was argued by some to be the greatest book ever written in politics. And he refers to the role of the state. When we talk about the state, we talk about the apparatus of government. So the role the state plays in our lives. Very often it's socialists who are accused of having an interfering state, the government sticking its nose in where it doesn't belong. But conservatives believe that the state has a particular role to play. Thomas Hobbes, in his book Leviathan, spoke about it being like a sea monster, the Leviathan, the sea creature. It was all-encompassing. It was a very, very powerful entity. And that's one of the kind of key points. Conservatives believe that the state is necessary to be powerful. It must be a powerful entity, but it must be a limited entity. Conservatives do not believe that the state exists to help people become wealthier, to help people get out of poverty. That's not what they believe the state's there for. The state is there as a protective mechanism to ensure cohesion within society, to ensure that people respect each other's right to live, etc. And therefore, it has to be a powerful entity. That's why, for example, Conservatives do believe in high public spending for things like the military, like law and order, in order to protect individuals from the worst excesses from others. And I'll talk about human nature in just a wee second, but the role of the state is there to be a protective mechanism. And they believe that authority must come from above in that regard. It's not a contract that can be made between two sides. It's got to be authority. Like, for example, a parent doesn't agree a contract with a child in terms of how that child must live in the home. The parent has to be the authority. And that's where the sense of paternalism, that's an important word that's used both by conservatives and socialists. This notion of paternalism, looking out for the interests of the people. Now, this is where socialists would argue that the state must look after the economic interests of the people too. Conservatives believe that this is about protecting the people because people are likely to abuse their freedom. So the state must be a powerful entity to protect, but not an interfering entity. Thomas Hobbes, absolutely crucial opinion there. On the state, I wanted to talk about another conservative thinker who is Benjamin Disraeli. He was the Prime Minister in the 19th century. And Benjamin Disraeli was Prime Minister at a time where there was major poverty and major wealth and such a division within society, during the Victorian era. And he argued that what he was seeing in front of him was the emergence of two nations, a rich nation and a poor nation. And in order to keep cohesion, the state had to play a slightly more active role. Now, some would accuse him of engaging and dabbling with socialism and left-wing politics. In actual fact, he said, it's not the job of Conservatives to lift people out of poverty. But what we've got to do is encourage a culture whereby the state plays a slightly more active role in encouraging the wealthy to look after the interests of the poor as well. Now, this is where the phrase one nation conservatism comes from. It's quite a departure from your traditional conservatives. David Cameron, Boris Johnson in particular, have tried to embody that sense of one nation conservatism. George Osborne himself had the Help to Buy scheme, where he would try and help people get on the housing ladder, which would be seen by traditional conservatives as something quite alien to them, because it was the government interfering in financial affairs that it shouldn't be doing. Boris Johnson often refers to himself being a one-nation conservative, looking to help the load of the poor in Northern England, as well as the rich in parts of the southeast of England. So one-nation conservatism is a way of trying to look at how the wealthy can help the poor. Margaret Thatcher wasn't convinced by this at all. She actually called it no-nation conservatism. She believed that people had to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, that it was the person's responsibility to take account of themselves. Quite a rough-edged conservatism in many ways, but the likes of David Cameron and Boris Johnson have tried to distance themselves from that to an extent. And within this course, folks, I will ask you to have a wee look at Theresa May's premiership in particular, whether she can be described as a one-nation conservative or more in line with Thatcherism. The next area that we're going to look at is human nature. Now, conservatives traditionally believe that human nature is something that is largely fixed and can't be changed. Socialists, on the other hand, think that you can transform human nature. Conservatives believe that human nature is essentially bad, that we are selfish beings, and this actually has its roots within the Old Testament of the Bible. This notion that, mankind is sinful, that we rebel against authority, that we don't trust one another, that we have a selfish, sinful nature to us. And that's why conservatives, similar to what we said about the state earlier on, believe that it's important to fund things like prisons, to fund things like extra military spending, in order to protect individuals from the worst excesses of other human beings. Controversial, but this idea that human nature is a negative thing, it's something that largely can't be changed, is fundamental to some conservative viewpoints. A conservative is much more likely to support the death penalty, for example, than a socialist is, because they have a harder time believing that human nature can be reformed to that extent, and that a punishment needs to be carried out to teach a lesson to others in order to learn from the worst excesses of human nature. An example was when there was the decision whether to go into Syria with airstrikes in 2018. The Prime Minister at the time, Theresa May, decided that she wanted to challenge the activities of Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian dictator, by launching airstrikes. She believed that al-Assad was someone that couldn't be trusted, that couldn't be worked with. Whereas Jeremy Corbyn at the time, the Labour leader, as a socialist, he took a much more positive view. He felt as though it was perhaps possible to engage people like al-Assad and negotiate with him. And this is a kind of thread. It's not universal, but it's a thread that runs through socialist and conservative politicians. Socialists are much more likely to want to engage and be more trustworthy, because they believe in that transformative nature of human nature, whereas conservatives are much more sceptical of it. So that's something to consider for human nature. The last one is economic matters, folks, and this is quite a tough one to really nail for Conservatives. In the past, there was no real conservative outlook on economics. As time has progressed, though, conservatism is associated with the free market. This is the notion that the government or the state doesn't control the price of things, that there is an invisible market of goods and services. So businesses are able to set up, if there is a demand for hairdressing services, then people will set up and they will look to charge the price that they believe the customers want to pay. They are more likely to believe in free market economics, that the natural supply and demand of things will control the price. Socialists believe in a much more centrally planned economy. Conservatives tend to believe in low taxation, with the exception of for things such as the military and for law and order. They believe in low taxation. If you've earned your money, you have the right to keep your money and spend it as you like, and that taxation should be used in a very, very limited set of circumstances, although many Conservatives now broadly agree with things like the health service, etc. They also believe in things like inheritance. Socialists would argue that inheritance actually embodies inequality, that if you leave money, it will make people wealthier and make other people poorer. So Conservatives are more likely to believe in the free market. And looking at thinkers like Milton Friedman, people like Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan believed that creating wealth was important and then it would trickle down. So hopefully I've left you with enough there just now, folks, to get you started. As you can hear, my wee budgie's cheaping away, looking to interrupt me to tell me to wind this up. So that's Conservatism this week. I will speak a wee bit about socialism the following week, looking at the same aspects and trying to compare and contrast them. Key thinkers: Benjamin Disraeli, Edmund Burke, Thomas Hobbes, and you could also look at Oakeshott, one of the key thinkers as well, who we'll speak about, but also Roger Scruton is an important one that you might want to consider as well. Hopefully you enjoy this element of the course. It gets you thinking. One of the points I want to really stress, though, is that conservatism is an ideology that's defined. By no means does every conservative politician think everything that we're defining here. It's a sliding scale. You will find people who are on the left of the Conservative Party who are conservatives. They see themselves as conservatives, but they might find themselves in a very similar position to those on the right of the Labour Party or the right of the SNP. So conservatism is about only seeking change where it is necessary and looking to be resistant to change for change's sake. I can get to work through our key points this week. Please get in touch if you need any help, and I'll be happy to help you out. Looking forward to working with you, folks. Take care. All the best.